Hi everyone, today I invite you to another tour through a new and super funky ujam plugin, Finisher Retro. So what does it do? For example, it ages signals. So let's go right ahead and turn these strings into old tape strings, like a mellotron. But aging isn't just filtering and reduction, it's also enhancement. Let's enhance these drums by running them through this old tube. Finisher Retro is also a tour through the history of sound treatment. Obviously, this also includes modulation, so let's modulate this synth. Another thing it includes is amplification. Let's run this questionable DI guitar through a nice old amp to shake it but not stir it. Before going through more examples, today I first want to talk about the philosophy behind this type of plugin. After all, you've heard of other vintage plugins, so what makes a Finisher different? To demonstrate this, allow me a general comparison of the different approaches, which I will do with just the onboard plugins of my beloved DAW, so as to not name any particular plugin brand. Forgive me, Cubase, you know I love you with all my heart, but you're my workhorse for every job, and today's job is a little bit of subtle self-ownage. So let's say you want to retroize a particular sound. Elsewhere you'd have a million plugins or plugin internal submodules, and you dial in every aspect one at a time. This is, granted, a super precise approach, but it also takes a lot of time, and it demands that you have a very precise idea of what you want beforehand. The precision of a Finisher is of a different kind. It allows you to precisely find the sweet spot. Cause here's the thing. Elsewhere, say you'd adjust a million knobs one after another. The Finisher knob will adjust a million knobs internally all at the same time, allowing you to find a position of all these knobs that you would never have found turning one knob at a time. You dial it in, you dial it back a bit, you do a little fine-tuning with these key parameters, and you're done. Let's also compare the efficiency of these two philosophies. Remember how we changed these nice hi-fi strings into old tape strings? Black and white strings, as a friend of mine likes to call them. With a knob-by-knob approach, we'd start with some EQing.
We also need some characteristic mid-range, which an analytical EQ might not offer, so let's use a model filter for that. Let's add a tape emulation and saturate the whole thing a bit. We should also add a bit of wow and flutter to simulate the warm nature of such tape machines. Tape instruments are mono. Finally, this is too clean, we need some tape noise. Nope, too static and one-dimensional. So let's go and search our sample library for some noise that's more multi-dimensional and more alive. There, this is better. So let's move all these plugins to a bus and feed the strings and the noise into the bus.
There, nice tape strings. And here's that same process in Finisher Retro. Choose the super fancy Meltronizer mode, turn this knob, and you're done. You get the idea. So let's take a closer look at what Finisher Retro has to offer. Like all finishers, it comes with 50 modes that are completely different sets of algorithms, sorted by decade, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Let's start with the drums. I want this bass drum to be irresponsibly boomy. Bass enhancement is very much a 90s technology, so 90s, subharmonics. I think that's sufficiently irresponsible. Let's think more in terms of spice and character. I'd like this piano to sound more like I sampled it from some old record. Older, please. Still older, please. There. And perhaps a bit more dimension and depth. I love sawtooths, but this digital treble parade does not please my inner synth geek. Finisher Retro gives you various saturation types that were typical for a particular decade. I'd like a 90s variant for this. Easy there. That's a sexy sawtooth. On the other hand, I want this rattling digital wave to be really big and wide. Trevor Horn style. Big fan. Such rattling digi-synths were often used in the 80s, but what people often forget is that masters like Mr. Horn usually ran them through super fancy effect units that cost a house or two. So we could use an early 80s reverb. Slightly gritty due to its early 80s converter resolution. But don't think Finisher Retro does just lo-fi verbs. For the history tour to be accurate, obviously there's also an advanced late 80s variant. Big and hi-fi through and through. For that same contrast, but the other way around, I could filter this bright synth either with a nice and smooth filter reminiscent of those big 80s polysynths, or maybe I'd prefer an old filter bank that's never been serviced and sounds like it. A boring digital filter this is not. Yet for this guitar, I want a trademark 90s effect as a pop cultural reference. Yet maybe also run it through another classic modulation pedal from the 70s. And at this point, allow me to tell you a secret. So officially these modes are freely modeled, just going by what sounds best. But since in some cases there are classics that just sound the best, some finisher modes are indeed precisely modeled after vintage gear that you'd pay a premium for just that one model plug-in elsewhere. So, how precise, you ask? Judge for yourself with this silly synth. Here's a not very cheap plug-in model of a famous modulator. And here's Finisher Retro's version. Okay, but that's just comparing different plug-in models. You should compare it to the analog originals, I hear you say. Okay, let's get really nerdy for a moment. This is a classic 70s string synthesizer, famous for its modulation effect. Why? Because when you turn off that famous modulation effect, the thing actually sounds like this. So we better turn that analog modulation back on. Or run the drive signal through Finisher's model of that circuit. Again. Did you notice that I cheated in the middle and exchanged original and retro? Sorry about that. I'd argue that the biggest difference is that the Finisher Retro variant lets you do things that the original can't. Like not just switching this on or off, but slowly turning the internal parade of knobs to adjust the intensity. Or super wide true stereo operation. Or freely adjust how old you want this thing to sound. So, bottom line, is precise modulation important? Well, maybe sometimes yes and sometimes no. For example, ask any guitar nerd if you need a technically correct model of this mysterious modulation pedal that's pretty famous, or whether you can just mimic it with a phaser. Be prepared for a loud lecture that will last the rest of the evening, so that one is an accurate model. On the other hand, I absolutely love how, for example, this emulation of a 4-track tape recorder allows me to make the signal sound 3 times more like a 4-track tape recorder than an actual 4-track tape recorder. Or even more importantly, this fabulous bass delay is not built after any particular classic echo unit, but it's easily the most supremely dirty and characterful tape echo in my collection. Nice. So, to summarize, Finisher Retro offers you a history of sound processing, from aging to enhancement, from accurate models of legendary circuits to free-form modes that just sound good, lo-fi and hi-fi spaces, and quite a few outlaws that just don't fit in any category. That's what's in the package. As always, you're cordially invited to try out the plugin for yourself without any restriction for a month. And that was Finisher Retro.